Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar with SweetUp. Today, we're going to be talking about upsells and how to manage upsells within the short-term rental space, and particularly both on the operations side, guest experience side, but then also on the accounting side. And so we'll give a few minutes here for people to slowly start to filter in. I can see people are starting to join now, which is great. While people are joining, maybe I can start to go over some of the initial slides just to kind of give some context for what we're going to be talking about today. So give me a second here to share my screen, and then we will go ahead and get started. Full screen. Perfect. All right, Simon, can you see the screen okay, just to confirm? Yeah, perfect. Awesome. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about operationalizing and accounting for compliant short-term rental upsells. And so there's an accounting portion of this, but there's also an operationalization, that's a funny word, operational kind of side to it as well. And so we're going to be talking both about the owner experience, the guest experience, and then diving more into how to keep these compliant and maintaining the accuracy when it comes to your financial accounting. And so before we get started, I just wanted to mention that we do have a poll today that we're going to be sharing, and I encourage everybody to take a look at this poll. I'm going to slowly get this started, so I'm going to launch it up here. We'll give you some time to get started and going through it. It does really help us kind of gather insight and feedback as to people who are on this call and the audience that we're dealing with, so we can use this detail to understand a little bit more about who came today and also how we can improve these in the future, but then also gives us some insight into where people are at in the industry as well. And so please take the time to kind of go through that. I've launched it now. It'll end in a few minutes here. Once you go through it, it will automatically keep track of all the data for us. So appreciate anybody who puts the time towards going through that poll. There's about 5 questions, so it's pretty quick and easy. So thank you for the time put towards doing that. So I'll give it a few more minutes as I see more and more people are joining. Definitely go through that poll if you haven't yet. Really appreciate it. And then also, I'm just going to go back to my screen here and start going through some of the housekeeping items associated with the webinar today. So I'm going to share my screen again. I think I am sharing it. Let me go back to that slide deck. Perfect. All right. So before we get started, like I said, a few reminders for housekeeping notes. So audio access, please ensure that you've allowed audio permissions so you can hear the session clearly. If you can't hear me right now, then that's probably an issue. You probably won't hear what I'm saying, but it is an audio event. There's no two-way communication here. It's just going to be us talking to you today, providing you with some insights into this space and kind of these topics in general. We will be recording the session today, so I will provide that recording following the call. So if you don't receive it, it's automatically generated. It goes directly to your email after it's been processed. But I'll also be likely putting it on YouTube to get an easy link to establish to be able to send that out as well. So if you want the audio, feel free to reach out directly to me if you don't receive it, and I'd be happy to get that over to you. Questions are welcome, so feel free to submit any questions during the time of the session. There is a questions section in the actual menu bar at the bottom. You'll see a questions Q&A tab. So click that. You can submit your questions and we will get those to the right person to answer them. If we have a lot of questions and we can't get through all of them, I'll be sure to reach out to individuals who submit questions so we can answer those as well. The answered questions will appear there as well. So as new questions get answered, you'll be able to see the answers to them. And then we also have a raise hand feature. So if you need help or assistance, you can definitely raise your hand. We'll be able to see and reach out to you through the chat to be able to kind of help you with any of the system errors that you're seeing. But yeah, really excited to get started today. If you haven't done that poll, again, just a reminder, we really appreciate if you can do that. And yeah, from now on, we'll kind of dive into the session and start getting started on introducing who we have today, because we're really excited actually to bring SweetUp into this conversation, and they're experts on this side of the operations when it comes to upsells, guest experience. I won't take away from Simon kind of introducing himself. I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Corey Reed. I've talked to a lot of people on the call today previously. If you've gone through any of our previous webinars or if you've gone through any of the demos with Clearing. I handle sales, marketing, partnerships at Clearing, and my background comes from a background in the short-term rental space. I used to work at property management softwares, and so upsells were certainly a big focus of the operational side of the property management system as well. And so know a little bit about the topic, but more so focused today on the accounting side of things. And so that's what I'll bring to the table. I'll hand it over to Simon now to introduce himself, and he can go ahead and let you know who he is.
Hi, thank you, Corey. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Simon Sarusi. I co-founded SuiteUp, and my experience in the space, I think, started back in 2019. Previously co-founded a short-term rental company called SoSuite, which we scaled to about 400 doors. I can definitely empathize a lot of the challenges, pains with dealing with guests, servicing upsells, operationalizing them as well, ensuring that you're not just offering them, but recording them appropriately, distributing the revenue where it needs to go, and servicing them. And so very excited to share what we've learned first, as operators, obviously, but also building SuiteUp and partnering with Clearing on helping operators of all sizes and with all asset types actually take their upsell game to the next level, both from offering it properly to folks as well as actually actioning it. So thanks for being here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Appreciate you joining as well. I know that you're very busy with all those things you have going on. And also, I know that you have some big events coming up in the near future. So excited to have you here today and looking forward to diving through all this with you. So before we kind of dive into the core kind of meat and potatoes of this session today, we did want to take a brief second just to introduce who we are we just introduced who we are from people perspective, but also who we represent and who we're here kind of talking about today. And so if you are using Clearing, then you'll know, but we are a short-term rental accounting software. We're really a niche focused tool that's focused on short-term rental accounting, and we do support various models in this space. There are generic accounting softwares out there that can do generic accounting, and they do it very well when it comes to operationalizing or operations of a operational kind of bank account or dealing with the core kind of corporate accounting style that is out there in generic business. But when it comes to more niche focused industries like short-term rentals, they can be challenging to use, and they're not necessarily built with short-term rentals in mind, and which is really the core focus why we kind of seen this gap in the industry, and we decided to come in and build something that's tailored specifically to short-term rentals. There are a lot of different things that make, using a standard kind of generic accounting software difficult in this space. And part of it has to do with the different various financial models that exist. And so, not everybody does everything the same way in this space. You have people that are doing trust accounting or professional property management, where essentially they are collecting all the funds and they act as that merchant of record, and then they have to go through all those details of reconciling either a trust account or escrow account, or maybe you're just holding it in a checkings account and you're keeping those deposits separate from your operations. And there's all these different models that exist when it comes to trust accounting even, and depending on the state and where you're located, what the rules are pertaining to these different the different trust accounting principles that you should follow. But it creates a lot of complexity when you're trying to go through the process of getting a deposit amount split out and then broken into individual bookings tied to individual properties and categories. And so trust accounting in general is a very complex kind of accounting function that handling that in a generic accounting software is very, very difficult. And so our tool is really built with the core ICP around trust accounting. But since then, we've expanded into other models as well, because we know and we've learned that if somebody's doing trust accounting, that doesn't mean that all of their properties or all their owners that they're working with are using trust accounting. There could be people that have a few owners that also manage in a coho style, and coho style meaning all funds go directly to the owner and then they have to invoice them to get paid. They might also have a couple arbitrage units, where arbitrage is more you are renting maybe a section of a building or maybe a few different doors within a building, and you just pay a lease, but then you are collecting all your rentals, and all your reservations are coming in as short-term rentals or midterm rentals, and you need to be able to keep track of your profit and loss associated with each property to be able to improve your business outcomes. And then there's owner operators. A lot of people have properties of their own that they rent out, and then they also rent out other owners' properties as well. And so through that whole process, there's actually quite a bit of different kind of models in this space, and a lot of times people have multiple different models as well. So they have co-hosting trust accounting, and they're combining all of these different systems into one place. And they're kind of need a system that can kind of manage all of these things. And so that's one of the complexities around short-term rental accounting. But then there's also, unique reconciliation considerations. For example, in a standard bank reconciliation, you have the ability to go through a bank statement and make sure that everything's accurate. There's no duplicates, no erroneous transactions. But there isn't even really a component of booking reconciliation in a lot of generic businesses. Whereas in this space, you really do have to keep track of what you expect a booking to receive versus what actually lands in the bank account, because it's not always apples to apples. And sometimes there is a reconciliation component. There's service fees, there's channel fees, there's commissions that get taken out, and those different discrepancies can really can really create inaccurate data when you actually go to create financial statements or to create an owner statement, for example. And so handling this in QuickBooks or in some sort of generic accounting software can be a little bit more cumbersome than doing it with a tool that's built specifically for short-term rentals that leverages, AI and automations to be able to help you build out these different types of processes so that you can get accurate and efficient data on your statements and on your financial statements and P&Ls. So then there's also just the last one I'll say here is really various ancillary services, expense considerations, revenue streams, lots of different complexities when it comes to this. And this is really the focus of today's session, is these different ancillary services, upsells, and revenue streams that, do have different ways of handling this type of data when it comes to transparency with your owners, guest experience, and all these other considerations. So that's just a little bit on clearing. I mean, if you've already, learned this, then I apologize for going over it again, but certainly for the new folks here, if you do have questions or want to learn more, we're certainly happy to dive into a demo or meet directly in a personalized kind of conversation down the line. I'm going to hand it back over to Simon here just to give an overview of what SweetUp is as well.
Thank you, Corey. I recognize a couple of familiar names as well. I see a lot of new faces as well have joined the webinar today. I'll give a brief introduction on what we do, and I think and why it's relevant particularly to this topic. So SweetUp is really the first software solely focused on guest operations, and guest operations is not just guest experience, and it's not just operations. And I think that that's where the crux of the issue often in this space can be, is that ultimately, on one hand, we have team members, departments that focus on delivering a guest experience, whether it's from messaging perspective, all the way from booking until checkout. And then we have team members, whether they're in-house, whether they're contracted or vetted vendors, that actually deliver services and goods to the guests, whether that's housekeeping before, after, or during a stay, or whether it's other types of services that may be granted depending on the type of concierge level of upselling, for example, that you may do. And SweetOps really reason of being is ensuring that all of your teams connected to the day-to-day of your operations and your reservations and your properties work from the same place. And so we deliver this through a couple of modules, fully white labeled, really next generation guest portals that feel like they are entirely your web app end to end for guests. An important upsell infrastructure in which we've invested a lot over the last few months and are continuing to invest in order to deliver more conversions for you and ensure that every booking isn't just limited to the accommodation fare, but can actually be maximized from a cash flow perspective. We also handle guest verification and screening, and the reason for that is in this context of this call isn't just to ensure that the guests that are booking with you and staying with you are good guests. It's to also enable that pre-check-in to ultimately collect data that is going to serve to personalize the experience further for the guest throughout the guest journey. And then obviously, last but not least, a multi-team task management. Getting an upsell is one thing, getting a request from a guest is one thing, fulfilling it accurately 100% of the time is the hard work. And that's what, at a certain scale in this industry becomes increasingly challenging, ensuring all the teams are on the same page and the guest knows what's going on in real time. Throughout these various modules with SweetUp, we drive a lot of operational optimization that enables teams to, and we've seen it over the last year, 2 or 3x in size their portfolio without having to add or very little to any human capital, but also drive additional revenue per listing and per reservation, as much as $75 to $100 per booking. And then last but not least, SuiteUp does integrate to the tools that you use today. We are aware that every, and I think that's sort of similar to what Corey said. And ultimately, this is a business where you may start in a rental arbitrage and then eventually move to property management, ultimately have different asset types in your portfolio. And that means you're using different tools, using different methods of communication, have different business models, and you need a tool that can grow and has a flexibility to grow with you there. And that's a big part of what SuiteUp is focused on. So if you've heard about, if you're already an existing customer and want to dive into any of those modules, don't hesitate. If you haven't heard of SuiteUp yet or are curious, obviously happy to give you a walkthrough at any point. Very excited now to dive into the topic at hand. I think with a just very quick intro on upsells in general. It's definitely one of those slightly overused words in this industry, right? It's sort of thrown around a lot. Oh, do you do upsells? Yes. How much do you make? Oh, our platform makes more upsells than you. I think it's first important to take a step back and understand what are upsells in general in this industry. And there's not one perfect definition. This is just a first attempt at putting a stake in the ground so that we can all, within this conversation, understand what upsells can be for you. Um, and so ultimately, upsells are going to be anything that is revenue generated or that adds value to the guest experience um, beyond the accommodation fare. And obviously, potentially the cleaning fee as well, if that's something that a lot of you are still doing as a separate line item. And that's something that should add revenue either in your pocket as a property manager or in the owner, or potentially in a way that is going to be split. Again, depending on the actual upsell, depending on the deals that you've actually have with owners there, there's a lot of consideration, which I'm excited to dive into how that's actually handled financially on the clearing side. With that being said, there's a couple of categories here that you're seeing. The first one is what I like to call first-hand goods and services. And I'm calling it first-hand because those are things that you're going to be offering to guests directly. And there's typically three big categories here. There's the traditional hospitality related upsells, and the big ones are the early check-ins and the late checkouts. That's one that I like to talk to because frequently operators are hesitant to offer these to your guests, which is understandable. It feels like I'm nickel and diming my guests, etc. Data actually shows that having a strong process to be able to approve or deny early check-ins and late checkouts in a very transparent way with your guests increases guest satisfaction, regardless of whether or not there is a charge associated to it. Um, the second kind is, so I use an example here as a romantic package, but this is effectively any type of goods or potential services as well that you want to offer to your guests that would work for you and your types of guests. I'm putting romantic package here because this is a fun one that has a surprisingly high conversion rate. If you have a warehouse where you're operating, having pre-made baskets with a bottle of bubbly and some chocolates that are going to cost you $35 a pop, and you can sell it as package for $60 or $70. Guests are going to be ecstatic with that. It's a nice surprise for their partner, loved ones, families when they come in. But those are just examples of, there's many examples of things that you can do, whether it's more in-depth concierge services, chef services, etc., that you are going to deliver with your teams. Mid-stay cleaned is another one. That's going to be more relevant, obviously, to stays that are typically going to be a week or longer, or midterm stays. So for those of you doing this, mid-stay cleans is a big revenue opportunity and one that guests are often highly relying on throughout their stay. There's then going to be charges and fees. The common ones there are there's resort fees, obviously, and sometimes fees that are related to the HOA where you operate, but some that can be revenue generating and EBITDA generating that can actually put profit on your bottom line are going to be things like pet fees and pool cleaning. Those can be captured at booking or later, and we'll dive into when to capture the upsells later on. Third-party upsells. So, unlike first-hand goods and services, third-party upsells are going to be delivered typically by either trusted third-party or platform-vetted third parties. By platform-vetted, that means, potentially a platform that is a marketplace for chefs that you can redirect your guests to. It could be something more global like Vider. There's many kinds of platforms and ways to offer those experiences, but they can be revenue generating, not just for the experience provider, but also for you as a person recommending it. There's then more advanced strategies as well, like damage waivers, and other things that other types of upsells that we're going to dive into, that aren't necessarily traditional in the upsell sense, but that can be massive profit generators, profit centers for you. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight is a free upsell. So, upsells often have a financial component associated to them. And by the way, in free upsells, what I also like to highlight to this is upsells are going to have a cost to you that you're going to offer for free to the guest. You still want to capture these, obviously, from a financial perspective, but you're not going to necessarily charge the guest for that. And examples of these could be if you're in a region where that's potentially prone to bad weather and guests often struggle with check-in or arriving at the property as a result. You could very easily offer a perk of if you're delayed on the road, we've partnered with these restaurants that will get you a free drink if you mention our name. Like those are the type of little things that can either be proactively offered to guests as part of their guest journey, or reactively when there's a guest issue that comes up. We found that it's always much better and economically more viable to tell a guest instead of, oh, you've had a cleanliness issue. Well, we're going to send a housekeeping team member and refund you your $60 cleaning fee. That instead of taking that road, it's often more economically viable to tell the guest, we will get you free lunch for up to $30 at the nearby diner. You're not only giving them something, but you're also getting them an actual experience, and it's often costing you less. So there's opportunities to turn these negative situations with, call it free upsells, that may still be cost centers to you. That's about it for a quick introduction. Again, don't hesitate to use the Q&A at any point to ask questions or even add to this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Simon. And so I'm just going to take a step back now. I mean, we've learned a little bit about the different types of upsells that, are in this industry. And now, there's some complexity elements to this as well. And so I want to just kind of focus in on some of the different challenges in this space with upsell management and, when it comes to accounting in general as well. And so, one of the biggest kind of and I think this is just consistent across this industry in general, is you have various sources of financial information. You have information coming from OTAs, you have information coming from your ancillary service providing tools, you have information coming from your bank account, you have information coming from your payment processing, and all these different sources of information, a lot of the times they don't all talk in one place prior to something like clearing being around. And so that various sources of financial information can make upsell accounting very challenging, because often in the past, people were having to pull out different types of, spreadsheets from different systems and then creating and centralizing them all within a spreadsheet so that they could run whether it hits their P&L or not, if it's going directly to the owner or if it's going to the business, they're trying to figure out how all these different complex pieces move together, and they have to kind of create something out of multiple different systems and multiple different reports. And so that can be a very big complexity in this space if you don't have an accounting tool that can kind of build that process into it with automation. Another one that we'll talk more about for sure is the various compliance requirements. There's a lot of new information coming into this space at all different times. There's lots of compliance changes that happen specifically amongst different OTAs in this space. And so how one OTA handles an upsell may not be the same as how another OTA can handle an upsell, or your property management software might have to do things differently for different OTAs, or there's just various compliance rules specifically as well. If you're in a state that requires trust accounting and you get an advanced deposit booking and it is subject to the 50% rule, which means that you can only use up to 50% of the booking's finances on pre-establishing certain kind of operations prior to that check-in. These are all different compliance things that play into essentially how you're going to manage your upsells revenue and how you're going to deal with your guest in the booking in general. And so another complex piece of this is really the compliance requirements. And then the last one that I have here is really the various methods of billing requirements. Maybe you do a midterm or a mid-state clean, and who's going to make that revenue? Is the cleaner going to get some of that fund? Are you going to be paying them for that? Obviously, you need to pay them for that job. But when it comes to the additional revenue made on top of that, is that going to you or is that going to the owner? When it comes to maybe somebody borrowing, you have an option of using a small little motorboat there, and the gas associated with all of it, is that money going directly to the owner because that owner is the one providing the boat, or is that money being split between you, the management management company and the owner, because that money is something that you're going to make a little bit of profit on as well. And so these billing requirements are a really important part to establish early and to establish often with your owners, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But at the end of the day, mastering the upsell life cycle is really key to financial clarity, but also not only to financial clarity, but also to owner satisfaction and also to guest satisfaction, because you don't want your guests being involved in what's happening behind the scenes between how you're actually implementing or creating an upsell and actually fulfilling what's required of that upsell. The guest just wants to show up. They want to, if they purchase an upsell, they want it to be ready and active and there for when they want it. And they don't want necessarily to have to know about how your scheduling is off or how your finances with, you're fighting with your owner about who's actually making the money on this upsell. And so keeping that out of the mind of the guest and out of the eyes of the guest is really of utmost important. But then also having established kind of rules and situations with your owners pre actually offering these upsells can take away all the complexity of that, unknown associated with your owner. And so I'm briefly going to talk on owner impact here. Simon will take it away with more of the guest impact side of things. And really, I was kind of alluding to that in my previous slide. And now I'm kind of going to go back towards talking more about that specific impact, because at the end of the day, some upsells are shared, some aren't, and you really should know the difference. I mean, defining upsell revenue ownership clearly in owner agreements is a really good idea to prevent confusion and disputes along the way. So if you have, this idea that you're going to create this new upsell that is going to be, your guests are going to love it, they've asked for it before, or it's something that you've seen work in other properties of yours, and you want to now take this to your owner and say, hey, look, we want to provide this type of an upsell. Establishing who's going to make the money off that upsell in an owner agreement can prevent basically any dispute down the line. And then also the transparency around this as well. So if there is essentially an upsell that you're going to split with the owner, maybe they're going to make 40% and you're going to make 60%. How are you going to actually execute that? So when it comes to scalable, transparent processes and understanding the true cost of that upsell, well, how is that money that you make now going to be passed through either to, if it's going directly to the management company and you want to make it, put it on your P&L as something that's actually associated with the profitability of a property, whether you do that or not, or if it's going directly to the owner and you want to, pass that revenue directly onto your owner statement, do you have a scalable system in place that can take all this data, ingest it, know the kind of splitting criteria associated with it, and then put it in the right spot on all your financial statements? And then when talking about, knowing the true cost, it's not only just how you expose this to your owners or how you kind of establish an agreement with an owner. It's also knowing, and Simon kind of talked about how there's different types of upsells, like the free ones or the ones that come with, revenue being made. But like, what is the cost of this upsell? If I'm going to provide this upsell, is this something that's going to be straight revenue, or is it something that I actually have to spend money on as well? And what's that difference? And if there is a difference, what's that netting out to? And if that net profit is there, how do we want to actually account for it? And so all of these are, really important to to understand prior to actually even launching this upsell, because you don't want to go through a process where you're half kind of established on an upsell, you're just trying it out, and then there's questions about who's making that money, and you have to have a fight with your owner about this, because anytime you're fighting with an owner, it leads to that opportunity of potentially losing their business. And then there's the whole point of like establishing and aligning owner statements with clear categorization rules. This kind of talks more towards the accounting side of things. Like, how do you want this documented on a statement? If it's something that your owner is going to make money on, how do you want that categorized from a bookkeeping perspective? But then also, how do you want that exposed on your statement in a way that they understand what that was for? And it's clear to them that you've sold this upsell, and now you're going to essentially share some of that profit with them or share some of that revenue with them. And then at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, a big focus of clearings in general is automation, right? We want to be able to automate these things so that you can scale them. Maybe doing it for the first few times with a bit of a manual process isn't the end of the world, but as you start getting to a point where now you're trying to do this across multiple different properties with multiple different guests involved, and it's going to be offered on every single visit. At this point, it's just going to become another manual process that you have to deal with unless you can get it to a point where you can automate it. And I'm not just talking the automating of the operational side of things, which Simon knows a lot more than I do about. I'm talking also automating the financial, dealing with the financials associated with all this and making sure that you're not spending an extra 40 minutes, an hour at the end of every single week going through your upsells and trying to tie them onto an owner statement so that you don't forget to at the end of the month. So these are all kind of more of that owner impact. At the end of the day, really comes down to, I think at the end of the day, it always comes down to transparency with owners, right? You want to make sure that whatever you've designed out as a process or something you're going to offer with the asset of somebody else, that it's very transparent and it's very defined in terms of owner agreements and in terms of how things are going to be shared, also how things are going to be executed, and just really making sure that you keep the guest out of it. The guest doesn't care about the operational side of an upsell. They really care more about just enjoying that upsell that they're purchasing. You want to make sure that it's you and your owner have it all figured out, and you don't really want to bring the owner too much into it either. You want to be the one establishing all these different operations, but you want to make sure that the owner's confident that what you're doing is transparent and that they're not going to have to ask questions about every single upsell. So I'm going to now kind of end it there and pass it back to the guest side of it. If there is any questions associated with the owner side of a financial, I'm going to show you more about how we kind of can automate some of this stuff, but I wanted to hand it back to Simon here. I'm going to actually switch off now as well, so that Simon can share his screen. So Simon, I'm sure you'll just go down to the bottom there and you can share that screen as well.
Yep. Thank you, Corey. I'll be sharing my screen right now. Hopefully you guys can see the last slide that Corey was on.
Yep.
Great. Fantastic. Um, so how to drive more upsell revenue and also like when to drive it, right? There's sort of two components to having a good upsell strategy. Three components, sorry, to having a good upsell strategy. The first one is offering it. The second one is servicing it. And the third one is properly recording it financially and ensuring that that flows properly through your statements, your owners, and your various accounts. We're going to be first chatting briefly about the first part, which is offering them all the opportunities to offer upsells. The second portion, which is how to actually act on them and service them properly. And then Corey will close the loop on some of the strategies and capabilities that Clearing has around properly recording these. So driving upsell revenue can be done, is often seen as something that you do, once a guest books. The guest is booked, and now I'm going to try and maximize my revenue for said guest. I'm going to offer additional services and such. But really, that actually should start before the booking. Um, and there's a couple reasons for that, but it should also end not once the booking ends, but actually post checkout as well, post booking. And these are some of the examples of the ways in which it can be offered throughout the guest journey. And all the way at the bottom, you'll see sort of the pluses and the minus, which can include the ways in which it sometimes adds value to the guest journey and sometimes can be a bit detrimental. At one point in the future, we'll be doing a webinar on emotional state of guest throughout the guest journey. But it's an exercise that as you're thinking about upsells in general, I would recommend everyone to do. Sort of understand when you're showing something to a guest, it has an impact, whether it's minimal or not, but it can either create a positive emotional feelings or slightly negative emotional feelings towards your brand and towards what you're showing. And ultimately, it is a wave and it is something that can go up, can go down, and you really want to make sure that you're always sort of staying above zero, so that when the guest checks out, you're at a highly positive number with the various little touch points that you've had throughout your stay, and that obviously delivers not only 5-star reviews but also more conversions of upsells throughout. So pre-booking, it's actually really important to highlight your different upsells policies. And that's something you can do as a way to convert the booking better, but it's also as a way to be more compliant, especially depending on specific OTAs. In general, we are big believers that being very clear prior to the booking about what type of upsells you have is actually going to increase your conversion rate. One, because a guest is going to be a lot more tempted by optionality. If they're booking with you versus a competitor in your market, and they may book with you because you're offering potentially additional chef services with trusted vetted parties, the third parties that you have in the area, or other concierge type of service, or because you may have an early check-in option available on demand. Merely adding this as part of your listing description, for example, or policies, depending on where that fits in the correct OTA or on your direct booking engine, is going to help guests understand prior to checking out and spending money with you. Okay, there's options that I can add post stay, and optionality helps with conversion. It's also an important transparency component that is for some OTAs actually mandatory. Airbnb, as of May, is requiring now a lot more clearly. It's always been a bit of a rule, but they've sort of been a bit more of a hard line now that any upsell, any additional fees or mandatory fees or optional ones that can be added to a stay need to be clearly stated in the listing description. So this just gives you another reason to be as transparent there. Um, Now, the second portion is as part of the checkout. Now, that can sometimes have a bit of a negative impact on both the guest experience and the conversion, because the more the basket increases in size at the checkout step, well, sometimes the lower the likelihood of converting someone, right? You want to be competitive there. Once you have a booking, you can upsell them, hence the word upsell. If they're still in the booking stage, you want to be careful not to upsell too much on the actual accommodation fare. You want to lock the guest in first and close that deal. That being said, we are seeing a lot of success with small damage waivers being offered as part of the booking, sometimes unbeknownst to the guest. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because ultimately for upsells, there's also sort of two ways to look at it. During this webinar today, we're speaking mostly about guest-facing upsells, but they are also owner-facing upsells. Um, there are upsells that you can share with the owners very clearly and say, hey, by signing with us as a property management company, we're gonna, cover every booking for $200 for small wear and tear and accidental damages on top of our insurance that we have. And you can support that type of upsell by, for example, telling the owner, we're going to charge every guest $15, $20 as part of their booking that we're going to keep in order to provide you with that insurance. That $20, $15 may go directly in your pocket, or depending on your setup, may go to a third-party provider. Some PMSs have shield type products, right, and insurances. And there's also many third parties that offer solutions there. So that obviously is depending on your risk profile and what you're looking to do. I would just definitely run some A/B tests there, because that can obviously reduce your conversion rate. Personalizing the upsell pre-stay. So here's where you can use guest communication, emails, a beautiful branded email, a text message, etc., especially for long lead times, to share with guests options that are available. It's a quick reminder, right? You had those options highlighted pre-booking, but now that they've booked, their mind is already elsewhere, and offering them a nice reminder of all the potential options and what's available to them in an actual proactive communication, not just something that they have to go and find inside a portal or on your listing or by asking you, is great. You want to be as proactive as you can operationally there. And so a one beautifully branded email, which you can launch through your PMS or through SuiteOp, can go a long way. There's then the pre-check-in flow. So the pre-check-in flow is really important for two main reasons. One, because you can actually use it to collect data about the guest and personalize the rest of the stay experience. The other reason there is because pre-check-in is often an opportunity to, again, proactively offer upsells that are very logical in a pre-check-in journey for a guest. You can imagine that when you book a hotel, when you book a short-term rental, an Airbnb, there's always that feeling of the pre-arrival. It's always part of the guest journey mentally. Because despite the fact that front desks are often a thing of the past, they're still something that we associate with traveling, the arrival or the pre-arrival. And so it's not unexpected to receive a link and to send a link to guests that is going to encourage them to potentially select a security deposit, or again, another damage waiver option here, which can raise again revenue substantially on top of offering a pre-check-in that is entirely digital, so that the arrival is a lot smoother. There's upsells that you can offer during the stay. So a quick typo here, obviously, but it's not obviously damage waivers. Those can be things like early check-ins, prior to the stay, like early check-ins, but also during the stay, like late checkouts. You can offer mid-stay cleans that can be dynamically offered depending on who the guest is. Those types of upsells really depend on how you're able to communicate that during the stay. There's various methods. You can use communication. You can use PDF got printed beautiful guides and homes. I've seen a lot of success there. You can also use a digital portal. And there's obviously a lot of options amongst which SuiteOp to help you deliver that. And then upsells don't stop at booking. they can be offered post-booking as well. And here it can range from promotions for returning guests, by returning with our company as a returning guest in the future, you'll get a free early check-in. Those are the type of addition or a 50% off on any late checkout or on any mid-stay cleans. I mean, those are little things that are going to encourage returning guests and are going to build brand loyalty as well. There's also, we've seen a lot of a very ingenious upsells here being offered to guests. For example, folks that have homes that are, really intelligently designed. Sometimes you get questions from guests as to where did you buy your mattress? Please tell me who designed that home, etc. Whether it's through a dedicated service that does this, and there's a lot, right, with Host GPO, Minuit, etc., that can help you potentially share recommendations. You can also build your own affiliate networks there with a couple of brands that you may be working with. These are the couple of ways in which SuiteUp can help throughout that process. Today, our focus is post-booking. We can help you offer upsells pre-stay, because as soon as a guest books with SuiteUp, even prior to completing a pre-check-in, they're going to be able to add things to their stay, request things as well, depending on the upsell type, early check-ins, mid-stay cleans, and so forth and so on. But you can also personalize that upsell scenario a lot through the pre-check-in. So the pre-check-in, as a reminder, right, is that process that the guest is going to complete prior to arrival. And by answering questions, it's not just going to enable you to gather that data. Depending on the tool you're using, tools like SuiteUp will actually allow you to showcase specific upsells to your guests, depending on what they answer. And in some cases, for mandatory upsells, require those upsells as well. One big pain point that we're seeing for especially non-Airbnb reservations is guests coming with pets and either not letting you know or letting you know at the last minute, and then you as an operator chasing the guest to pay that pet fee. You can enable automations, whether it's with Zapier or with your PMS or with SuiteUp, in which if the guest says that they're coming with a pet, require them to pay a pet fee as part of the portal. And then last but not least, entice the guest to come back to relive the experience through various upsells inside the portal as well. These are just a quick overview of what the numbers say. So this is data that we just pulled from basically about 12 months of data across customers. We were quite granular for damage waivers because we thought it was a fun one to dig into. The other ones are broader ranges, but this is what you should obviously for the bottom of the range at a minimum, and for the top of the range, what you can do if you're highly optimized or have specific property types, generate with upsells. Those numbers are per property per month, but we are also going to be pulling in the future per reservations per month number to share that with you too. For waivers, damage waivers are definitely a SuiteUp favorite. I think that for any professional operator takes their business seriously, it is a no-brainer to sell damage waiver, and in other words, sell peace of mind to your guests. For those who are not familiar, it's basically telling your guests, instead of a security deposit after booking, you can have the option to pay a non-refundable fee, in which case we'll let any small wear and tear and accidental damage up to a certain limit, which you can define, slide. Those waivers can generate, we've seen for the sort of average RevPAR of about $130 to $170, which is sort of where the average RevPAR for SuiteUp customer falls, anywhere from $60 to $160, 59 to up to 159 per property per month in additional as an additional profit center, since typically only those waivers are about 90% margin, and only 10% ends up being used for actual wear and tear. Again, you have to price that damage waiver appropriately in order for that to be the case, and we're happy to help you do that. For early check-in and late checkouts, you should see, I think, a minimum of $25, and then typically we see folks that are highly optimized earning as much as $100. One thing that's really important here is not see early check-in and late checkout as something that you can only offer if there's no check-in that day and no checkout on the day of the early check-in. Guests are more than willing to pay for a 2 p.m. early check-in, even if it's only $20 or $30. experiences through the third parties are definitely a nice add-on. And the reason why I love these is while they're typically not the highest revenue generating upsell here, they're also the lowest lift. They're typically done by a third party, and you're just collecting by redirecting the guest through that vetted third parties. And then finally, we have pet fees and mid-stay cleans. That obviously depends on your operational capabilities and the types of properties and agreements with owners that you have. Some owners are obviously very anti-pets, but I think in the post-COVID era where pet ownership in general has boomed and pets are not only pets but family members, pet fees are a no-brainer, and we're seeing that as a big profit center, especially when shared with owners. You know, it's often something that can, in which the payment can be split in part thanks to a solution like clearing, enabling you to appeal owners to offer pet friendliness in their properties. And then the last thing here is how to actually offer those upsells. So here, we're seeing a lot of very ingenious solutions today that operators are using. When they're getting an upsell request through a message or through a platform, push that to Zapier and push that to your task management. That's how we've thought about things in SuiteUp as well. But the way it starts is first being aware of the upsell request. And so find out what works for you in your operation. Do you want to be aware via Slack, via text, via email? You can use, again, solutions like Zapier, like NA10 and other low-code solutions, or you can use a portal like SuiteUp to help you be aware of those requests. Running A/B tests on those upsells, something you can do very easily as well. Offer a $20 2 p.m. check-in for 10 properties and offer a $30 2 p.m. check-in. Maybe you'll see that they convert exactly the same over 3 months and that $10 doesn't make any difference for guests. Understand who's responsible for approving specific upsells that do require approval in your teams as well. I'm sure that's very, very clearly highlighted. Making sure there's always a tasks, even if that task is just acknowledging that an upsell has been requested and ensuring that that third-party vendor is actually going to complete it. Because the last thing you want is a guest requesting something, expecting to get it, and then have to follow up with you and say, when is this coming? Or I did not receive this during my stay, which often isn't even something they'll communicate, but it's something that'll show up in the review. So SuiteUp obviously helps you do a lot of these things with our task operations module, but there are various tools and various other ways to be able to achieve that as well. We just wanted to make you guys aware of some of the things to really keep in mind to be able to launch an upsell strategy. This is a slide that we've sort of spoken to. So obviously when we share the recording, look at it. But as you all know, there are different requirements per OTAs as well. Airbnb requires a lot of upsells to be paid through the platform. Solutions like SuiteUp do allow you to do that fully in a fully compliant way, where the guest can be properly redirected to the Airbnb Resolution Center with the upsell already in context. Right from their SuiteUp portal, enabling them to complete the checkout there. Or if they prefer pay by card, ultimately SuiteUp gives you the option to offer guests the journey that they prefer, ensuring compliance with platforms.
Yeah, and just
Handing it back over to you, Corey.
yeah, I was
Sorry.
just gonna add on to that. Just I put two. We didn't want to go too much into like a sales pitch here because that's not really the purpose of this webinar. So I just got some screenshots in here really to tie the circle of what was just talked about with those compliant upsells, because there's really two different ways that upsells can make it onto a statement in clearing. And one is, we do have an integration with SuiteOps, so we can get metadata from the transactions associated with an upsell to be able to pull that information in, categorize it properly, and then also tie it to the right responsibility, whether that's going directly to the owner, whether that's going to the management company, whether there's going to be a split. But particularly with Airbnb on the ones that you do have to handle through the resolution center, if you haven't explored it yet, one of the big options you have with clearing is the ability to pull all those resolution adjustments directly into clearing and then handle them in a way that you define as the way to handle them. So default categorization can be applied to different types of resolutions. So if you want to categorize them in a certain way, the details like the notes that you want to display on the statements alongside these can be pulled in from the resolution center, the resolution dates. But most importantly, I think here would be how you define that split between how this additional upsell may go to either the management company or the owner. So if it's a resolution of like a resolution payout where you're making more revenue on an add-on service, and you want to say that, $40 of that $110 is going to go to my my owner, and the remaining $70 I'm going to take to the management company. You can do that quite simply within one dashboard within clearing, and then it pulls through onto that statement as well, so that basically you don't have to go through and pull reports and manually add these things. They're pulling them in from the resolution center. You're creating criteria for how they should be handled. Now, with other upsells that aren't being handled through the resolution center, you can still split upsells. You can still pull in those transactions and create automation rules or logic-based rules to tie them to a specific category. The metadata associated with the transactions can help you allocate to properties and also help you allocate to certain categories if you want to use that as your criteria. And then, of course, you can split those and tie them to different billing responsibilities, whether that's going to the owner or the management company. Ultimately, once these are locked, they're not going to be able to be changed. So they're on the statement. If it's something that happens in the future as well, because as we all know, sometimes resolution adjustments happen later on down the line than actually during the month of the booking. You can make sure that you can reconcile that out on a future owner statement, but still tie that adjustment back to the original booking. So if you don't know about this yet and you're using clearing, certainly reach out to support. They can certainly help you with learning more about how we handle upsells. If you're interested in learning more about SuiteUp, in the follow-up email that goes out, I do have both websites on there. Definitely book a meeting with Simon. As somebody that's been in the industry for a while and seen a lot of these different types of tools, what their tool is just phenomenal from a perspective of user experience and also just the beauty of kind of how they have built out these processes. So I can't speak more about it, but I definitely encourage you to jump on a call with them. And then if you haven't heard about clearing, feel free to come chat with us as well. We'd be happy to chat with you. I think the next slide is just going into questions and answers. So I wanted to start with just looking at what we have here, and I'll answer them all live. So one of the questions here, Simon, is actually for SuiteUp. It says, does SuiteUp handle sales tax on upsells that are subject to sales tax?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so you can absolutely add like a percentage sales tax to every upsell today, and then you can actually use. So what we won't do at SuiteUp is we won't like distribute that tax to the right authorities. That's not a capabilities that we have today, and to be transparent, probably not something we're going to do soon. But you have the ability to collect that sales tax, and then what you can then do, and Corey can maybe speak to that as well, is depending on if the sales tax is the VAT says 8% or 10% of said upsell, ensure that once that amount has been collected, clearing can split the transaction and categorize the tax as what it is, so that you can more easily remit it when you're closing your books, and then have the upsell be distributed depending on what your process is, whether it's to you, split with the owner, or through a third party.
Awesome. Another question here is what happens when there's so if is there, do you ever run into scenarios where there's an upsell? Basically, it's saying, do you ever run into scenarios where there's an upsell that a task gets created, but the fulfillment never, or the payment never was processed? Is there any way of kind of managing that process at all, where maybe it was a failed payment or something like that?
Yeah, great question. Typically there's sort of two portions to that. There's going to be upsells, going to be purchases, right? Where effectively you don't have necessarily an availability concern, in the sense that if the guest request pays for the upsell, the payment immediately goes through, and obviously a task sort of gets created to fulfill said upsell. For these types of upsell, we always recommend in your payment processor to enable 3D Secure, which is something that we enforce for SuiteUp. But if you're using another platform for upsells, then that platform may not enforce it. That enables you to ensure that the payment always goes through and 100% protects it against chargeback fraud. It doesn't protect it against chargeback for services not rendered, but you don't have the risk of the card being or the transaction being flagged for fraud, and then you having to then have a chargeback to deal with. Now, for upsells that are request based, which I think is also part of what your question is highlighting, like what if I'm offering an early check-in and it needs to be first approved, and then the guest card needs to be charged. That's a great question. So in SuiteUp, there are workflows that are built in and that you can build more on top of if you'd like, but there are built-in workflows that will display on your dashboard any pending upsell that haven't been approved, with their payment status as well. So when you actually click approve on an upsell on SuiteUp, it'll tell you, would you like to charge the card on file for that upsell? The way we typically handle requests is that we capture an authorization hold for a particular upsell. So if a guest requests an early check-in, call it $50, the card is going to have a hold of $50. And that ensures that when you want to approve the upsell and capture the payment, whether it's the entire 50 or a smaller amount, that you never run into a situation of insufficient funds or again of potential fraud down the line because of 3D Secure backing it. So typically the payment goes through at that time. You can also have scenarios in which you only want to charge the guest once the service has been rendered, like a mid-stay clean. In which case you would leave the upsell as pending, have a task be automatically created through a customized workflow in SuiteUp, and then have another workflow which, once the task is complete, automatically notify the team so they can charge the card. Those are things that you can fully automate by setting up workflows, and we're actually looking forward to automating it even further so that the card could potentially even be charged automatically once a task is completed.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. The last one here that I have is basically what in your experience, what's the easiest upsell to get started with? If you've never done it before, it's something you wanted to get started with.
Um, I would say, I mean, the no-brainer ones are going to be early check-in, late checkouts, even if it's 2 or 3 p.m. early check-in, late checkouts, right? Like, assuming that your basic default check-in time is 4, offering a 2 p.m. early check-in or 3 p.m. early check-in for even $10 or $15 is fairly easy to do operationally. If you can't do it operationally, then you should obviously have a closer look at your operation, because if your home is only ready at exactly 4 p.m., then that's obviously putting you already in jeopardy today. Um, the other one that I think is a no-brainer is damage waivers. I mean, obviously that's not something that may be a good fit if you only have a handful of properties for now. But as you scale, I think anybody with more than a dozen properties should be looking carefully at damage waivers, because it takes about 3 minutes to launch with, and we're seeing just absolutely incredible results across our entire customer cohorts to generate revenue there. On top of it, helping close owners, because you're effectively telling owners, hey, we're protect if there's a small dent on the table, we'll take care of it. And you can take care of it because you're collecting that much more from the guests that are purchasing said waiver.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all of them for now. So, I mean, in terms of next steps here, basically, there's a survey that will go out after this call. We do appreciate if you take the time to fill out that survey. You know, it just gives us some feedback. It helps us get better in our careers and also in what we're doing as companies. So, appreciate the time that you put into both the poll and the survey. And then otherwise, just encourage you to reach out to either Simon or myself if you have more questions. Of course, we haven't dug deep into the products in this call, and so there's lots more to learn about each of the different products, and this is really a focus topic. But other than that, just thank you for showing up today. Thank you for your participation. And also, yeah, thank you. And I hope you have a great rest of your summer. I'll let Simon say goodbye and then we can log off.
Thanks everyone for your time. Don't hesitate to reach out, even if you're not a user or aren't ready to be a user. If you have questions about upsells, compliance, Corey and I would be more than happy to help you, navigate this sometimes a bit of a maze of a process here. So we're here to help.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone.
Bye now.